This is something, if we go in, we do it right and we stay here. We're going to treat this as a discipline in its own right. And that's really how we've been trying to approach it from every angle of the federation since then.
Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Virtual Velo Podcast with me, Emma Martin, and my co-host, Chris Schwenker. Well, the Virtual Velo Podcast, the show that bridges the gap between athlete and avatar, keeping it real in the world of cycling esports. Today, we are joined by Josh Peacock, Director of Marketing and Events at Cycling Canada, and we're going to talk all things about the recent national championships, Cycling Canada's approach to cycling esports, the challenges of growing participation, and what's ahead for the federation and its position in the evolving landscape of cycling esports, Chris.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking to Josh. And, it's no mystery. I've stated my viewpoint on many occasions. The national federations are critical to the success of cycling esports. And in many ways, they hold all the cards. And let me explain why. We saw this play out with the Spanish Federation. I'm going to use his name because he said I could. And Emma, you'll recognize it. Iker Morel, who is known for his success on the Sunday Race Club, qualified for the World Championship semifinals, but wasn't able to go because the Spanish Federation refused to endorse him for a UCI license. And the UCI was unsuccessful despite multiple attempts to persuade the Federation to comply. We've celebrated the national governing bodies that have accepted cycling esports as a legitimate discipline. We had a brilliant discussion with Martin Hjorngard of the Danish Federation during episode 53. They allocate significant resources to support him as their esports coordinator, and it shows. They recently crowned their national champions in a live event final with sponsorship that was broadcast to 1.5 million households across a private TV network. Connie Bjornhall, the Swedish Federation's esports director, also deserves acknowledgement. Their live final was a part of the Winter National Championship week there and broadcast on Swedish public TV. There are a few others, but unfortunately, this is the exception and not the rule. And I'm interested in hearing from Josh to get his perspective on challenges he faces as the event coordinator for a federation that, from the outside, appears to have much more hands-off approach to cycling esports.
Well, Josh, thank you ever so much for joining us today. I am really excited to dive in and to chat to you about cycling esports and Cycling Canada. Shall we start with a big picture question? Cycling esports has been steadily establishing its foothold. What's Cycling Canada's philosophy when it comes to this emerging and evolving new discipline?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, you guys. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love hearing what the other federations are doing. It's actually inspiring to me to hear the successes they've had and how they've been able to bring it into things like you say, public TV. That's very, very cool. So for us, we did have a really deliberate approach to esports when we first decided to be more involved in it. It was the discussion internally. The challenge with our federation, and I'm sure many are in the same boat, is that just because esports became UCI recognized didn't mean that overnight the federation had more resources, more staff, more money to pull this discipline off and do it right. There was a pause. We were in the middle of the pandemic that it really started to kick off for us. And so we did have some allocated resources. We had myself not attending so many events, not dealing with so many IRL events, as we call them, during those years. So we had a big discussion. I remember we called it the war room. When we sat down, we got the team together. We sat inside the boardroom at the Cycling Canada offices and we said, okay, if we're going to do esports, we want to make sure that we're doing it right, and we're doing it right by the community first and foremost. So we sat down and we talked about it, and we decided, we came up with a bit of a roadmap of what we wanted to do. We had connected with multiple platforms who were willing to support us. And we made the decision when it came time to pull the trigger and actually start going ahead with it. If we're going to do this, this isn't a temporary thing. This isn't just something we're going to do to get us through the pandemic. This is something, if we go in, we do it right and we stay here. We're going to treat this as a discipline in its own right. And that's really how we've been trying to approach it from every angle of the federation since then, is coming in and treating this as another discipline, just like road, just like mountain bike, just like cyclocross. That's really how it's been. Now the challenge still exists. We still haven't received more resources or staffing to manage all of this. As you probably know, Canadian federations are always fighting for more funding from the government. So, this is the challenge. And now, especially with in real life racing sort of back happening and all the normal stuff that we see, it does become a challenge. And back to that sort of original point of it being a bit more of a hands-off approach. It's really now digging back to the community and saying, okay, let's work with you guys. Let's find how we can work together to make this happen in Canada.
Canada is very cold. as we were discussing in pre-production. And we've seen with a lot of those Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Denmark and Norway, that those countries are very much an obvious choice indoor cycling esports. We see that success there. How are you working to capitalize on that natural advantage and promoting cycling esports in your country?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge. When we first, actually before the pandemic hit, we actually were thinking about esports before, everybody jumped on it when the pandemic was live and everybody was really focusing there from the federation side. We had some conversations with Zwift, and I'll never forget that first conversation I had with Zwift where they told us the number of Canadians that were on Zwift, and it trumped our membership numbers by 5 or 6 times. And it was like, I think everybody in that room was like, holy smokes, there's an opportunity here. Let's try to, like exactly like you said, let's try to find a way to bridge this gap. Let's speak with this community. Let's see what kind of value we can bring to them. So, I mean, it's a slow process. We didn't at all expect that, we would start programming and all of a sudden all those members would come to Cycling Canada, all those Zwift folks. It's ongoing. You'll see our first approach really was genuinely connect with the community. So we set up a Discord channel where we now have over 2,000 folks on there that interact regularly. It's been a really fantastic place. Folks are sending me direct messages all the time and giving me both positive and negative feedback. It's across the board for sure. I think, and we're still in that phase, to be honest with you, bridging the gap by having conversations. When we were setting up our weekly Zwift programming, the first thing I did was connect with a local club, not a local to me, but a Canadian club called HPL Cycling. They're very active in the sport. A guy by the name of Paul Cutting. He took my call. He was a very active Zwifter. He had been on the platform for many years prior to our involvement. I just sort of had a conversation with him, said, hey, we're looking to add some stuff. Zwift is going to give us some space on the public calendar. What would actually add value here? What could we do that would be cool to you and your fellow Zwifters and the club that you're part of? And so really that's what it's been ever since. There's some work now being done. I mean, you have to become a member to race the national championships, for example. So some of that crossover is naturally occurring, but I'd love to see that grow a little bit further for sure. It starts with the conversation.
Well, let's pick up on that a little bit, actually, Josh, because you talk about when you think about success. Okay, and I am asking you to open that crystal ball up a little bit further. What does that look like? Is it measured by the number of new members joining Cycling Calendar? Is it the number of people racing cycling esports? Where are your KPIs going with this, your metrics for the federation itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I just came back from a staff retreat and we spoke strategy for about 4 days with our entire staff and all of our coaches and everybody. And we went back into our 10-year strategic plan. And we have a few goals and it translates directly to what we're doing with esports. One is to grow our federation to 100,000 members. Right now, we sit anywhere between 35,000 and 40,000 members. So certainly a goal is to bring some of these esports folks into our Cycling Canada membership so that we can speak to them, bring them into the community, talk to them more about the other programming we're doing, and ideally, hopefully add value to them. That's a big one for us for sure. And really, it's just the other one. I think the overall mandate is just inspire Canadians to cycle. If we can look at esports, for example, as a way to get people into the sport, that's fantastic. Whether it's, grassroots programming, something like esports in your living room, that's getting people on bikes. And if we can get them on a bicycle, inside, outside, whatever it may be, and then we can get them into the membership and speak to them, we can show them the opportunities that exist to join a local club, be a part of, our community, or, join some local races, maybe outside once in a while, or whatever they feel they want to do. It's just that opportunity to bring more people into the sport, ideally, and have those conversations.
How much does a membership of Cycling Canada cost, Josh?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. If you go into our Discord, you'll see lots of talk about that one. So Cycling Canada actually only has 11 members ourselves. That's our provincial and territorial associations. So every single one of them is a member. The rest from there are actual physical members. The provincial and territorial associations sell those memberships and they manage those memberships. So all the UCI memberships, it's very different from a lot of countries. Like USA is one example. They sell it all from the main office at USA Cycling. In Canada, very democratic approach. We have our provinces and territories administer the licensing for all those direct members. So to go back to your question about pricing, those provincial and territorial associations control the price point. And that's something where esports is starting to play a factor. I had a conversation even this morning with one of our esports champs racers. The challenge can be in some provinces, the entry point for a membership is quite high. close to $100. In other provinces, it can be a lot lower, $25 or $30. So our job as the national federation now is to work with those provincial and territorial associations to maybe find an even keel entry point membership where it's relatable or applies to esports members who maybe, they're just doing one sanctioned event with us a year. It's national championships. Right now, the value proposition really isn't there for a lot of these people to spend $100 on a membership to race for 40 minutes, and that's it. That's been an interesting aspect of it. And it's something now that is very clear, especially following this year's championships, that we need to find a more consistent approach to membership cost for those folks.
It's really interesting, isn't it? If you're buying a membership and it is at that price point, you are looking for value from your federation as well, aren't you? You're looking for value from that.
Absolutely.
And if you're outside on the road, well, if I pour a British cycling membership, the main value to me is that I get the insurance. So if I have an issue on the road, then that actually helps me out. But if you're indoors and only ever cycling in your home, there's less need for those types of expected value propositions. What are those types of value propositions that you might offer to those riders to make that membership more attractable?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a couple of things. And one, it's a really interesting point about British cycling. I think a lot of national federations maybe struggle with this, is not just being an insurance broker. We're more value than just, but a lot of people, that's where they find their primary value, like commuters and things like that. It's, to have 24/7 coverage is amazing. So certainly that's one. And as you say, in esports, a little less relevant, although could be a value proposition if you're an esports athlete and you do like to ride your bike to work, or maybe you want to join a club or something like that. I think there's a couple of different areas, is, connecting members through to our sponsors and things like that. So that's something we're exploring a little further. And every new partner, I also oversee the sponsorships for all the federations. So every sponsor we bring on is like, what kind of value can you add to our member? If somebody's purchasing a membership, can they get some really deep discounts with your brand? And can go ahead and use that. So just standard member discounts with partner brands is one area. The other one is just simply enhancing our esports offering. And I think this is maybe the larger discussion that's happening at the federation level with my counterparts in different countries as well, is like, how can we as the federation add value to what's going on already in esports, which is pretty fantastic. I'm a Zwift guy. I can jump in any Wednesday night and join a race if I feel like it. So more can I do as a federation to build on that value? And so I think a lot of it is that competitive racing with performance verification, working with the UCI to build out maybe a sanctioned calendar, things like that. So that's some of the stuff we're actively speaking with the UCI about and different stakeholders, is what more can we add to make that membership a little bit more worth it?
And it's really interesting, isn't it? It's sort of a classic chicken and egg dilemma, isn't it? Low participation doesn't justify heavy investment, but without investment, participation remains low. And it really is that balance, isn't it? How do you reach that tipping point for cycling esports, or even is it something that you can aim to do? I mean, you said there, you were really surprised about the number of Canadian members racing and riding on Zwift, many, many times more than the membership of Cycling Canada itself. It's a really interesting relationship, isn't it? And about how one discipline can be so big, yet almost invisible in some respects.
Yeah, how we've approached esports since day one. Esports lives as a portfolio actually underneath our community department. It's number one. That's what it's all about. It's about the community. What I personally love coming from the events side, working on UCI events across the board, is like, you work a standard UCI event, you build a tech guide, you do all these things. There is a very clear set of rules. With esports, I can put it into the Discord channel and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this number of laps, and I get immediate feedback and I can change it. That's the beauty of it at the federation level, is I can adapt based on what the community wants. For every federation that's doing this, is build your programming alongside your community. Listen to what they are looking for, because ultimately they're going to be the ones purchasing the memberships that you're trying to sell, and they need to see extra value. They know, and you need to do a good job of conveying what you can do for them, what your resources look like, what your connections to the UCI are, connections to the platforms, things like that. So, I mean, that's still, in our championships, it was really great. A few of our community members reached out, and I was really excited about this. Was like, hey, Josh, we saw you did it this year, connected with Echelon, good job. Is there anything that we can do as the community to help you organize this next year? And to me, that was so rewarding to hear that, because that's really what I want to see, is like our community with our support, organizing these sanctioned events with community at the heart of it. Those folks know exactly what they're looking for in terms of value out of this event. So working directly alongside them to host these events that make them relevant.
So Cycling Canada isn't actually an event organizer, right? You don't organize any events yourself. So you would lean on the community for that.
Traditionally speaking, yeah, every one of our national championships and every other discipline organized by what we call a local organizing committee in a local town, city, municipality, what have you. There are a few. We host, as Cycling Canada, our track championships. For example, we live in one of the velodromes near Toronto. We also host a Track Nations Cup or World Cup event as well. But that's kind of like where there's an absence of an LOC. And that's what we're doing with esports right now. We wanted to do a champs. We wanted to make sure it happened. LOC became me. And this year, Echelon definitely came in and helped out. But that is the goal, is to build, what we call local organizing committees through the esports community and have them at the heart of it for sure.
So, Josh, every goal comes with its challenges. What hurdle have you faced at the federation level when it comes to promoting and developing cycling esports in Canada?
I'm going to say it's probably a tale as old as time. It's capacity. I was able to really take a leadership role on this during the pandemic, where the events hat was less full. We really just weren't traveling to events. We weren't organizing World Cups or track championships or traveling to mountain bike championships, what have you. So I had the capacity to really dig in and spend hours and hours on this. The challenge is, since then, real life racing has come back. I'm still committed to it because I believe in esports as a discipline. I really do. But my time is very stretched. I'm also the guy who oversees the marketing and the sponsorship for the federation. So it becomes difficult. That's number one. The challenge is if we could find resources, and this is again where I say the local community is really helpful to us in that regard. We're not getting extra funding to hire extra staff to do this. And like you said, the investment from, we don't pull enough funds out of these events, for example, to hire somebody to do it. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, is just capacity internally to be able to pull it off. We're actively looking for sort of solutions to that.
So let's talk about the national championship, and be biased in this, but I watched every minute. And I thought it was great. And I think it's probably a good time to acknowledge Colin from Inside Cycling World on YouTube for covering the event. As far as I know, he does it just because he believes in it and he wants to promote the sport. And it was great to be able to see it. And I don't think anybody will argue that the two best esports racers in Canada are your now national champion in Tiffany Penner and Tom Thrall. But I think it's safe to say that the low turnout numbers were disappointing. What did you think of the event, and what was your take on the participation levels?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Colin was fantastic. That was my first time in action, and I was emailing just this morning actually to give him kudos for the good job he did. These people with the passion that shines through is the same when Nathan did our Zwift one last year. It's just like they add so much to the event, and he did such a great job interacting with the chat. We had set up our registration that people could add in like about me information that could be included. He was actively going through that and talking about people, and it was great to see that. On the other side, yeah, I think the participation was quite a bit lower than previous years. We knew Zwift would be high just because that's where the majority of our community regularly rides. So it was low. It was definitely, I expected it to be a bit lower, just migrating to another platform again. It was kind of similar when we hosted it on RGT back in the day. It was a less active platform than say Zwift for our community. But I think challenge that I see coming through, and again, having that Discord has been really great. For those who don't think I read it for sure every day. I just don't have time to respond to everything. Membership was a big one. It goes back to that earlier question of like, hey, if I got to spend $100 on a membership and I just get to race for 40 minutes, what's the point in buying that membership? And that's something we heard loud and clear. I think that was a big challenge to it. In the earlier years, we were seeing things like performance verification being a barrier to entry. People didn't want to have to do a video and do all this like legwork to make sure that they could race. But actually, it's really refreshing to see that that's less of a barrier now. People are seeing that that's sort of standard with high level competition in esports, and that understanding is there. That was the big one last year, was perform. Like, yes, you do have to do this video with all these crazy specifications around it, but trust, like, this is important for the integrity of the sport and the results. So yeah, that's the biggest feedback I'm seeing, and I get it. Is the membership, is the value proposition isn't really there. And I suspect that's why we lost a lot of those competitors, to be honest with you.
When you talk about that value proposition, did you as a federation promote the event? Like, did you send out a mailer to all your members? Did you promote it on socials? Did you put out a press release? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, there was dedicated press release in the weeks leading up. We do that with every championships. Prior to that, when we announced the wider national championship calendar, we did it once in July, where esports was included. And at that point, we didn't know if it would be back on Zwift or where it would be. We had set the date, and that's about it. Came back with a clarification press release again, while mentioning some other championship events. I think that was in December where we announced it again. The team promoted a bit on social media in the weeks leading up as well. But there's always room for improvement. I think probably there could have been a bit better of a job just to get it out there. And of course, we post within the community itself. So Discord has been a great place just to get those, esports specific eyeballs on what we're doing.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the performance verification wasn't as big a barrier, but you did move to a different platform this year, right? Where you moved to MyWhoosh, where the performance verification standards are pretty strict as far as the Power Passport and the other thing. Do you think that moving to MyWhoosh had a factor on the participation?
I mean, my personal opinion, I think anytime you're doing a big event like this on a platform other than Zwift, that's going to have that impact for sure, especially on those what we call the are normally called the amateur championship categories or the non-elite categories, so the Masters and the U17s and things like that. I mean, it's fair to say with it not being on Zwift, that could be a factor. I think people are getting pretty good at trying new platforms. There was some growing pains. MyWhoosh is new. In the beginning, we all know those issues that were happening where you couldn't open it with Apple TV and there was challenges with different technology using the platform itself. I think a lot of they fixed that. Obviously, they've done a great job to get it up to par and get it to the right place. I think a lot of people carried that too. It's platform to use. I just don't know it. It crashes my computer sometimes, or I can't whatever. So I think just new platform in general probably had something to do with it. I think overall the MyWhoosh experience is great. Seeing it on both on World Championships and on our own live stream, it was awesome just to see, how it presents and how it looks. And I think, like you say, the performance verification, that was a little bit more hands off for me. Echelon handled that piece with MyWhoosh, but it was really good to see they have dialed that in and they've built that in a little bit.
And the feedback that I've received is the barriers are the license fees, the performance verification, and the switching to a new platform. Now, getting back to the performance verification, was that enough of a trade-off for you to provide a racing environment that was as authentic as possible and perhaps sacrifice a couple members because of that?
I think more switching from Zwift to MyWhoosh, it was a little bit more than that. The performance verification certainly was a piece of it, and we may have been able to find a way to find a third-party performance verification to do it on Zwift. I'm not too sure. Depends on what their level of support exactly would have been. But in early conversations with them, I will give kudos to Zwift from last year. Is we had one of their staff, Boda, and him and I were probably emailing every day for about a month leading up to that event. The support was so much more than just performance verification. Like I say, I'm sure we may have been able to find a way to do it on Zwift with that specific piece. But I think it was a whole lot more than that. The stuff that they were answering for me in emails about customizing the event, about branding in game, about broadcast stuff and everything. There was just so much more that, I think they stepped back a little bit after last year and said, wow, okay, it's similar to Cycling Canada, where we don't have the extra resources to manage this huge piece. I don't think they fully did either. And they really put in a ton of hours and maybe realized, maybe this isn't, something that we can fully support like we did last year. So that conversation we had was it was performance verification was part of it, but I think there was so much more. And it was just yeah, we'll support if you want to use the platform. We just can't service it like we did last year. It was a lot on our team. So there was more than that. I do obviously appreciate the level of performance verification that's involved in MyWhoosh. And I think that that's something we'd like to work towards making it a bit more accessible across the board. Is, whether it's working with UCI, I had a great conversation with Jacob last week about how we can look to standardize these types of things across all the platforms, is just, finding that way to do it. I think looking back, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the platforms and with world championships, everything moving forward, what platforms sort of rise to the top, or if we just actually have a multitude that are very popular amongst the whole community. It seems to change year to year what's going on with all of that. So it's been interesting to watch.
Is the fact that the world championships are hosted by MyWhoosh, is that important to you to have your athlete forming their national championships on the same platform that they will be performing in the world championships?
It plays a part for sure. I mean, it's a discussion that was had with my high performance team. We require that you have to have participated in international championships to participate at the World Championships. It doesn't matter necessarily the category. It's just you have to have participated in that nationals. It's the same policy we have for every discipline. You want to go to downhill national championships, you have to, or worlds, you have to have competed at nationals. We applied that policy to esports. And I think for my high performance team, that's a big thing, is just to have seen who rose to the top on the platform that the World Championships is going to occur on. It's nice. Like last year we used Zwift. It brought, like you said, the two top Canadians to the top. Tom was there, Tiffany was there. So I don't think it tremendously impacts the result. You're pretty happy with who you've got no matter what, but it definitely adds a level of comfort knowing that, they performed very well on the platform that will be used for World Championships.
A lot of the elite racers will be listening to this. Have you thought about what your qualification criteria are going to be for the 2025 World Championships?
That's something I have actually zero involvement. I mean, I'll work with our high performance department just to vet that, yes, these people did compete at nationals. It's something that I will likely be asked about at some point with them. But like I say, that's usually when it comes to the high performance national team selection, I stay pretty hands off on that one.
So when you say that you have to compete in the national championships in order to compete in the world championships, that certainly does limit the number of candidates that are available for Team Canada. Is that a factor? Is that something that you might want to revisit so you can increase the number and make it perhaps more successful for you?
It could be. I mean, I would leave that to the high performance team for sure. I think that part is pretty well communicated amongst our elite sort of groups, is they do know. And I think last year we did a lot of work on that. It was the first year we sort of reenacted that policy across the board. That was pretty well communicated. In some cases, exemptions can be had one athlete, for example, who presented a doctor's note and they were able to, that was sufficient enough to say, okay, like they had a valid excuse not to be at the national championships. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting when that selection time comes to speak with the high performance team and say, yeah, like the pool's a little smaller this year. I don't know if you guys do want to open that up or if we want to provide that exemption for this year. I can't speak on their behalf. It may be a discussion though, for sure.
And it's really good though, isn't it? It's interesting as well because, your 2025 national champions, Tom Thrall was 12th in the World Championships last year and Tiffany Penner was 17th. So both putting in really strong performances at world level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'll say they're both great ambassadors for the sport as well. I mean, throughout our preparations for nationals this year, Tom was actively messaging me, giving me advice and giving feedback based on some discussion we were seeing in Discord or what have you, lap length, all these different things. It's so nice to have him providing that feedback. And it's been the same with all those elite level athletes. Is all it takes is a direct message or an email, and they're always happy to provide their input because you can see they have a passion for it. They want to make this sport as good as it can be, and they're willing to work with the federation, which from my aspect is just invaluable.
Well, I tell you, it was fabulous to watch them week in, week out on the Echelon Racing League. They were absolutely creating the action. So it was brilliant to see. Just picking up, you mentioned, talking to the UCI just there. Do you think the UCI should play a more active role in providing clearer guidelines for federations? I know it was something that we've had conversations about before, Chris, but it'd be really interesting, Josh, to hear your perspective on that. The UCI, clearer guidelines maybe for federations, perhaps having consistent rules and expectations across the board. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was really the basis of, they want to hear from us, which is great. I love that they're reaching out to us the same way we're reaching out to the community. They want to hear what our challenges are and what we'd like to see. And that was my number one thing, was there are a few federations with folks like me and folks even more involved than me who have taken an interest in esports and have a passion for it and want to see it succeed. But conversely, there's going to be other federations that don't have the same level of resources, capacity, or passion behind it, but still want to find a way into it. So that was my recommendation to the UCI, was like, let's try to get some standards in place where, all those federations can come in at a consistent level. So we see this. It's like every rule book for every other discipline. You've got course length, you've got duration for category, these types of things where they've created a bit of a framework. So for these sanctioned events, like national championships, I've seen it even on the MyWhoosh results, is some did that stage style approach like they did at Worlds, some did a scratch race like mine. It's one or the other. I would love to see that level of standardization in place just as a resource for the federation. And then finding a way to make that applicable across all platforms is the second challenge there. You can create standards for a road race and you kind of know you're going to get a road in a country somewhere or a city and it's going to be similar. It's not quite the same for esports. You've got different platforms, different dynamics. You've got power-ups in Zwift. You don't have it in MyWhoosh. Like, you've got all these different things you need to consider. And that was a big part of the just brain dead. Is like, yeah, like you could pretty easily create some standards and create an application for them and send that around to the NSOs or the federations. But the challenge is making it so it's a bit more platform agnostic and creating a bit of a, and then they have to do that dealing with the different platforms. It's like, who's on board, who's going to work with us for this. They have their work cut out for them for sure, but framework and resources, I'd love to just see some consistency. And my colleagues in other countries that don't have me there, or the level of support that the Swedish have or the Danish have or the French have, it's like, I'd love to see them. The best way to get them involved is provide them resources to host and pull, or more simple than it currently is. Right now, you have to do a pretty deep dive and really learn the discipline before you're thinking about hosting something.
Yeah, I think that's one of the major hurdles for the sport in general. And I was discussing this with them prior to you coming on, Josh, that the majority of the traditional cycling public doesn't understand cycling esports. And because of that, it's very easy for them to criticize when they see a racer like Tom putting up the numbers that he's putting. They say, how could that possibly be legit? All this racing fake. And it's very refreshing to hear you have the back of sports and to have a thoughtful policy in place. Something that happened in the news last week was a real gut shot for the sport. And that was when the IOC announced that they're going to be delaying the Olympic Esports Games until 2027. I'm curious, is the inclusion of cycling esports in the Olympic Esports Games going to be something that you're watching? Does that help you invest in the sport, raise the profile of the sport for the federation? Does that allow your NOC to then get involved to support what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. A good chunk of our funding is earmarked to Olympic discipline sports, and it may work different in different countries and their different NOCs. But for us, yeah, that would infuse. And it's interesting, right? Because this isn't the traditional Olympics. So is our NOC going to see esports Olympics and take it with the same seriousness that they do a regular? That's all yet to be seen. My hope is that yes, with cycling esports being involved in the Olympics, that infuses some additional resources into the federation to our capacity. That's the big one is, I would love, I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the federations has like an esports coordinator. That's my dream. Is right now it's split. I do the competitive side and my colleague Chris does the community side, and we're managing it. If I could have somebody full-time in that position, that'd be fantastic. So yeah, it remains yet to be seen, but theoretically that probably would mean that for a lot of federations, that there's the IOC is behind this. They're hosting an Olympics for it. In theory, that should mean a bit of increased resources for them from their NOCs and their federal funding bodies for sure.
Josh, where do you see the sport going? Where do you see cycling esports going over the next 5 years or so?
I see it becoming, to the earlier point, I see it becoming a bit more legitimized in terms of the general public eye. I think cycling in just the last few years, we've seen even traditional cycling disciplines and high-level athletes really gravitating towards it as like a legitimate discipline. And this is something, a lot of that performance verification work that's been done and the integrity is certainly building behind it, where that idea that this is fake or everybody can just cheat or whatever, I think that's getting a lot better. So as it becomes a bit more sort of established with the federations and mainstream and the platforms themselves, but I think you're going to start to see a bit more of the public knowing what this is and being interested in what this is. The esports Olympic Games will do a lot for that as well. The general public will be like, wow, how can I get behind that? How can I get involved in this? It's always so interesting. Last weekend was our championships and I spent my entire day in the living room watching the live stream, mostly handling the Discord. But when I had to tell friends who were outside of the sport, like, what are you organizing this weekend? It's like, oh, an esports championships. And then to explain this to them, it's the funniest thing. And I'm sure you guys have to do this all the time. I think the best description I have for people in the general public is like, think of like a Peloton, but it's racing against other people live real time. And then they start to figure it out. But I think what you're going to see is less of me having to explain it that way in the next, 5 to 10 years. Is no, you saw this at the Olympic Games in 2027, or you're seeing it in these promotions from our federation or what have you. That's the hope, at least, is that this becomes a mainstream sport discipline, just like road cycling, just like mountain biking and everything else. I truly think we'll get there.
And just finally, Josh, how do you envisage Cycling Canada positioning itself in that future of cycling esports? Are there any tangible plans that you might have that the community could go,
Yeah, I think number one is the membership piece. Starting right from the bottom, right from the groundwork up is like, let's first work on a membership that is relevant and accessible to the community. So that's the starting point and I think our goal back to the beginning, right, is to have a whole lot more members than we currently have here at Cycling Canada. So that leads to that goal, but I'm not going to create a membership unless there's actual value for that. So that's where I see ourselves. I see esports becoming a larger proportion of our overall membership number. And we're always trying to think of ways to do that. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. That conversation with the UCI last week was really interesting to me. Is like, hey, if sanctioned racing really does become a thing, that's something the federation can really bite its teeth into. And that membership all of a sudden becomes a little bit more valuable. You're getting that membership for more than just that one race per year. It means something for sort of the larger spectrum and your calendar as a whole. So that's where I see it. And that's why I want to be at the forefront of the discussions with the UCI and including with other national federations like myself. It's like, hey guys, how are we going to do this? Like, we shouldn't be doing this in silos. I think that's detrimental to the growth of esports as a whole. Is every federation should be looking at each other and looking to each other to support and grow this all in the same way. So if I see something another federation is doing, amazing, I'm going to reach out to them and talk to them about it and see how it went. And likewise, if they see something that I'm doing, I'm always happy to share my expertise and my learnings in that space.
Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I think on that thought of collaboration across national governing bodies is where we should end. Josh Peacock, Cycling Canada, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about cycling esports on the Virtual Velo Podcast. Well,
thank you so much for having me.
You can subscribe to the Virtual Velo Podcast on your favourite podcast provider and, of course, YouTube. You can follow me, Emma Martin, on Instagram at biking_Emma, and you can follow Chris at the Zamunique. You can catch up with me putting words to the action on the Sunday Race Club and of course every Sunday. And you can head over to thezamunique.com and sign up for the bi-monthly newsletter to support independent cycling esports journalism. We will, of course, have yet more interesting guests from the world of cycling esports joining us, including cycling influencers Kate McLeod, UAE Team Emirates, and esports superstar Michael Vink. Restart's Dean Cunningham will also be here shortly, and we have several other impactful people waiting in the wings. Let's thank them for their patience. The schedule is long at the moment. Thank you, Josh, for sharing your insights, and thank you to our listeners for listening. Please take care. Chris will tell you, take care of your heart, get that coronary calcium scan. I will tell you to stay safe, to enjoy your cycling. We will see you again soon. Goodbye.